The Mediator's Gambit. When the Stellar Confederation's most feared negotiator arrived at Earth expecting another quick conquest, they brought their standard intimidation playbook: massive ships, energy weapons, and psychological warfare tactics that had worked on 1,000 worlds. What they didn't expect was to meet Commander Sarah Chen, a former hostage negotiator from Detroit, who looked at their terrifying ultimatum and asked if they'd like some coffee while they talked. Sometimes the most dangerous humans are the ones who treat galactic conquest like a neighborhood dispute. The warning came at 800 hours on a Tuesday. Commander Sarah Chen was reviewing refugee settlement reports in her office aboard the diplomatic vessel Harmony when Lieutenant Zara Okafor burst through the door without knocking. Sarah had been Earth's chief alien contact specialist for 3 years, but they'd never actually met any aliens. Her job mostly involved theoretical protocols and training scenarios. "Commander, we've got incoming," Zara announced, her voice tight, with controlled excitement. Massive energy signatures, multiple ships, definitely not human technology. Sarah set down her coffee mug and looked out the viewport. Earth hung below them like a blue marble, peaceful and unaware. Space around their small diplomatic station appeared empty, but she trusted her communications officer's readings. "How massive are we talking?" Sarah asked, already moving toward the command center. "Bigger than anything we've ever built," Zara replied, keeping pace. "The lead ship is reading as 3 kilometers long. There are at least 12 others in formation behind it." Dr. Marcus Webb looked up from his xenobiology station as they entered the command center. Marcus had spent his career studying theoretical alien biology, preparing for humanity's first contact. Like Sarah, he'd never imagined it would happen quite like this. "Energy patterns are consistent with directed fusion propulsion," Marcus reported. "Highly advanced, centuries ahead of our technology. But Sarah, there's something odd about their approach vector." "Odd how?" "They're not trying to hide. Most military doctrines would suggest stealth for a first contact scenario, but they're broadcasting on every frequency. It's like they want us to see them coming." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. In her 20 years as a hostage negotiator back in Detroit, she'd learned to read situations quickly. Criminals who made a lot of noise usually wanted attention more than violence. They had demands, grievances, something they needed to communicate. "Zara, are they trying to communicate with us?" "Yes, Commander. Standard mathematical sequences, basic physics, and now they're attempting language acquisition. They're learning English remarkably fast. Put me through to them when they're ready." 30 minutes later, the viewport filled with the largest artificial structure Sarah had ever seen. The alien flagship looked like someone had taken a city and stretched it into the shape of an arrowhead. Weapon ports lined its hull like windows, and energy fields shimmered around its edges. It was designed to be impressive, even terrifying. The main screen flickered to life, revealing the most alien face Sarah had ever imagined. The creature had 6 eyes arranged around a central mouth, skin that shifted between purple and silver, and what appeared to be decorative spines running along its elongated skull. When it spoke, its voice resonated through multiple harmonics. "I am Overlord Thexkar, primary negotiator of the Stellar Confederation. You will identify yourself and prepare to receive terms of integration into our alliance." Sarah had dealt with plenty of demanding personalities over the years. The tone was familiar, even if the face wasn't. She leaned back in her chair and smiled. "Hello, Overlord Thexkar. I'm Commander Sarah Chen, representing Earth's diplomatic corps. Would you like some coffee while we talk? I find these conversations go better when everyone's comfortable." The alien's 6 eyes blinked in sequence, which Sarah took as a sign of confusion. Behind Thexkar, she could see other aliens moving around what appeared to be a command center. They were all different species, but they moved with the rigid precision of a military hierarchy. "You misunderstand your situation, human. This is not a conversation. This is notification of your planet's integration into the Confederation. All species must contribute to the greater unity." "That sounds like quite an undertaking," Sarah replied, genuinely interested. "How many species are part of your Confederation?" 237 worlds have recognized the wisdom of unity. Thexakar announced proudly. Your world will be the 238th. Dr. Webb leaned over to Sarah's chair. That's a massive administrative challenge, he whispered. The logistics alone would be staggering. Sarah nodded and addressed the screen again. Overlord, I have to say, managing 237 different species sounds incredibly complex. How do you handle the cultural differences, dietary requirements, economic systems? For the first time, Thexakar seemed slightly off balance. These matters are resolved through proper integration protocols. All species adapt to Confederation standards. But that must create significant challenges, Sarah continued. In my experience, forced standardization often leads to internal conflicts. How do you handle resistance movements or cultural preservation requests? Thexakar's spines flattened against his skull, which Marcus quietly noted as likely a sign of agitation. Resistance is not tolerated. Unity requires sacrifice of primitive individualism. Sarah leaned forward with the same expression she'd used when talking to desperate criminals who'd painted themselves into a corner. Overlord, can I ask you something? How's morale in the Confederation? Are your member species happy with their integration? The question seemed to catch Thexakar completely off guard. Behind him, Sarah noticed other aliens exchanging glances. A younger creature with similar features but brighter coloring stepped closer to the communication station. Overlord, the younger alien said quietly. Perhaps we should proceed with standard intimidation protocols. Thexakar straightened, his spines rising again. Human Chen, you will observe the consequences of resistance. The screen filled with images of destroyed worlds, burning cities, and fleeing populations. This is the fate of those who refuse integration. Your choice is simple: willing cooperation or complete destruction. Sarah watched the footage with the same careful attention she'd given to crime scene videos. The destruction was real, but something about the presentation felt rehearsed, almost desperate. Those images are certainly dramatic, she said when the presentation ended. But Overlord, I noticed something interesting. In every case you've shown me, the destruction came after failed integration attempts. You're not conquering these worlds for resources or territory. You're trying to force them into a system that isn't working. The command center fell silent. Thexakar's eyes focused on Sarah with new intensity. You speak of matters beyond your understanding, primitive human. Maybe, Sarah agreed, but I've spent my career dealing with crisis situations and I recognize the signs. Your Confederation isn't expanding from strength. You're expanding because you have problems you can't solve internally, and you keep hoping the next species you integrate will have the answers. Dr. Webb was furiously taking notes, his xenobiology training helping him read the subtle body language of the alien crew. He passed Sarah a quick message. Multiple species showing stress indicators. This is hitting close to home. Sarah stood up and walked closer to the screen. Overlord Thexakar, what if I told you that instead of integrating Earth into your Confederation, we might be able to help you solve some of these underlying problems? Humans have experience with diversity management, resource allocation disputes, and cultural mediation. Impossible, Thexakar replied, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. No species has ever offered assistance to the Confederation. Integration is the only path to unity. Has anyone ever tried offering assistance? Sarah asked gently. Or do you usually lead with the massive fleet and ultimatum approach? The young alien behind Thexakar spoke up again. Overlord, this human's approach is unusual. Perhaps we should consult with the council before proceeding. Thexakar's spines flattened completely. Sarah recognized the expression from countless negotiations. It was the look of someone who'd been following a script that suddenly wasn't working. Sub-Commander Vril, you will not question established protocols, Thexakar snapped, but there was uncertainty in his voice. Sarah seized the moment. Sub-Commander Vril, is it? You sound like someone with fresh perspectives. In human culture, we value voices that question established methods. Some of our greatest breakthroughs came from people who were willing to try new approaches. The human addresses you directly, Vril, observed another alien voice off-screen. This is highly irregular. Everything about this situation is irregular. Vril replied, stepping fully into view. His coloring was even brighter than Sarah had initially noticed, with patterns that seemed to shift like oil on water. Overlord. In all our integration scenarios, target species respond with either immediate submission or military resistance. This human is doing neither. She is employing psychological manipulation, Thexkar declared, but he sounded like he was trying to convince himself. Sarah laughed, not mockingly but with genuine humor. Overlord, I'm a career mediator. Of course I'm using psychological techniques, but I'm not trying to manipulate you. I'm trying to understand what you actually need, as opposed to what you think you want. Dr. Webb cleared his throat. Commander, I'm detecting increased chatter between the ships in their fleet. Multiple languages, high emotional content. I think word is spreading about this conversation. Lieutenant Okafor looked up from her communications station. Commander, I'm also picking up transmissions to what appears to be Confederation Command. They're requesting guidance on how to proceed. Overlord, Sarah said. It sounds like your fleet is as confused by this situation as you are. That tells me you've never encountered a species that wanted to talk before fighting or surrendering. Is that correct? Thexkar was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, less formal. In 400 years of Confederation expansion, no species has ever offered assistance. Well, Sarah said with a smile, humans have always been a bit different. We have this annoying habit of trying to fix things instead of just accepting them. Overlord, what if we approached this situation differently? Instead of integration or destruction? What if we tried cooperation? Cooperation? Vril stepped closer to the communication array. Explain this concept. Sarah looked around the command center at her small crew. Marcus was grinning like he'd just discovered a new species, which in a way he had. Zara was monitoring communications channels, her expression shifting between excitement and disbelief. They were all about to embark on the strangest negotiation in human history. Sub-Commander Vril, cooperation means we work together to solve mutual problems without anyone having to give up their identity or autonomy. Humans have gotten quite good at it, despite our reputation for being stubborn and independent. This is unprecedented, Thexkar muttered, but Sarah noticed he was no longer issuing ultimatums. Unprecedented situations require unprecedented solutions, Sarah replied. Overlord Sub-Commander, would you be willing to continue this conversation? Not as conquerors and conquered, but as people trying to solve problems? The screen flickered for a moment, then stabilized. When it cleared, both Thexkar and Vril were visible, along with several other alien species representatives. Sarah could see them debating in low voices, their body language suggesting intense discussion. Finally, Thexkar spoke. Human Chen, you propose something that has never been attempted in Confederation history. The risks are enormous. The biggest risk, Sarah replied, is continuing to do something that clearly isn't working. You've got 237 worlds in your Confederation, but you're still expanding because the current system isn't solving your underlying problems. That's not sustainable, and I think you know it. Sub-Commander Vril looked directly at the screen. What would cooperation look like, Human Sarah? Sarah smiled. It was the first time any of them had used her first name, and she recognized it as a breakthrough moment. It would start with you telling me what problems the Confederation is really trying to solve, and then we figure out if humans might have some ideas that could help. The command center of the alien flagship fell silent. Sarah could see aliens of different species looking at each other with expressions she was learning to read as surprise and uncertainty. After several minutes, Overlord Thexkar spoke. Human Sarah Chen, we will consider your proposal, but first you must understand the scope of what you are suggesting. The Confederation faces challenges that have persisted for centuries. The integration protocol exists because no other solution has ever been found. Then maybe it's time to try a new approach, Sarah replied. Overlord, in human problem solving, we have a saying. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always gotten. It sounds like the Confederation could use some fresh thinking. Dr. Webb leaned over again. Sarah, I'm reading massive energy signatures throughout their fleet. They're powering down weapons systems. Sarah felt a surge of hope. In hostage negotiations, weapons being lowered was always a positive sign. That's encouraging, Overlord. Are you willing to hear what cooperation might look like? We will listen, Thexkar said slowly. But understand, human, if your proposals prove inadequate, the integration protocol remains available. Fair enough, Sarah agreed. But Overlord, I have to ask, in 400 years of integration, has the protocol actually solved your core problems? Or have you just gotten bigger without getting better? The silence that followed was the longest yet. Sarah waited patiently, knowing that sometimes the most important part of negotiation was letting people think. Finally, Subcommander Vril spoke. Overlord, perhaps we should invite the human aboard our vessel for more detailed discussions. This communication method is limiting. Thexkar's spines rose and fell several times, which Sarah was learning, indicated deep thought. Very well. Human Sarah Chen, you and 2 companions may transport to our vessel, but know that you will be the first non-Confederation beings to set foot on a Confederation ship without being conquered first. We're honored by the trust, Sarah replied, meaning it. And Overlord, thank you for being willing to try something new. In my experience, the bravest people are the ones willing to question their own assumptions. As the transmission ended, Dr. Webb let out a long breath. Sarah, do you realize what just happened? We may have just prevented either Earth's conquest or destruction by asking the Galactic Empire if they needed therapy. Lieutenant Okafor was staring at her communications, bored in amazement. Commander, I'm monitoring dozens of conversations across their fleet. The word cooperation is being translated into languages we've never heard before, and it's causing quite a stir. Sarah stood and straightened her uniform. Well, team, looks like we're about to become the first humans to attempt marriage counseling for an entire galactic civilization. Anyone have any last-minute advice for how to mediate a dispute between 237 different species? Don't let them serve dinner, Marcus suggested with a grin. With that many dietary requirements, someone's bound to be offended by the menu. As they prepared to beam over to the alien flagship, Sarah couldn't help but smile. In all her years of hostage negotiation, she'd never imagined the skills would translate to interstellar diplomacy. But people were people, regardless of how many eyes they had or what color their skin was. And right now, she was about to meet a whole lot of people who needed help solving problems they'd been struggling with for centuries. The universe was about to get very interesting. The unthinkable counteroffer. The teleportation experience felt like being dissolved in warm honey and then reassembled atom by atom. Sarah materialized on the alien flagship with Dr. Webb and Lieutenant Okafor, immediately struck by the sheer scale of everything around them. The chamber they'd arrived in could have housed a football stadium, with ceilings that disappeared into shadows above and walls covered in what appeared to be living metal that pulsed with soft bioluminescent patterns. Subcommander Vril waited for them, accompanied by 3 other aliens Sarah hadn't seen before. Each was clearly from a different species, a walking testament to the Confederation's diversity. One resembled a crystalline tree with arms, another looked like a cross between an octopus and a flower, and the third appeared to be made entirely of shifting geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Welcome aboard the Eternal Synthesis, Vril said, his translator giving his words a formal tone that didn't match his obvious curiosity. I am designated as your guide and cultural interpreter. These are Representatives Zixhal, Bloomtender, and Vector Prime, speaking for the Mineral Coalition, Garden Worlds Alliance, and Mathematical Certainty Union, respectively. Dr. Webb was already taking notes, his xenobiology background helping him catalog the incredible diversity. Remarkable, he whispered to Sarah. Each species has completely different evolutionary paths, different atmospheric requirements, different sensory systems. The logistical challenge of keeping them all functional on one ship is staggering. Lieutenant Okafor was monitoring her portable communications array. Commander, I'm detecting over 40 different atmospheric zones on this ship alone. They've essentially built a floating city that can accommodate dozens of different biologies simultaneously. Sarah nodded, impressed despite herself. Sub-Commander Vril, this is extraordinary engineering. How do you manage such complex life support systems? With great difficulty, Vril admitted, leading them through corridors that constantly shifted their environmental conditions. The eternal synthesis requires 70% of its energy output just to maintain habitable zones for all Confederation species. It is inefficient. Representative Zixhal spoke, their crystalline structure chiming like wind chimes. Efficiency was sacrificed for unity. All species must be able to participate in Confederation leadership, regardless of biological requirements. That's actually quite admirable, Sarah said, meaning it. You've prioritized inclusion over convenience, but I'm guessing it creates other challenges. Many challenges, agreed Bloom Tender, their flower-like petals shifting through different colors as they spoke. Resource allocation conflicts occur daily. Some species require minerals that are toxic to others. Atmospheric requirements often conflict. Social structures are incompatible. They entered what was clearly the ship's main conference chamber, a vast room with environmental zones clearly delineated by subtle energy barriers. Sarah could see dozens of different species representatives arranged in complex seating configurations, each in their own optimized environment. At the center, on a raised platform that could accommodate multiple biologies, sat Overlord Thexkar, alongside several other aliens who radiated authority. As the humans approached, Sarah noticed that every conversation in the room stopped. Human Sarah Chen, Thexkar announced, you have requested to understand the challenges facing the Confederation. Very well, observe. The chamber filled with holographic displays showing resource flowcharts, population density maps, and conflict resolution reports. The data was staggering in its complexity and concerning in its implications. The Confederation encompasses 237 worlds, Thexkar began, containing over 3 trillion individuals of different species. Resource distribution requires constant recalculation as populations grow and requirements change. Cultural conflicts arise daily between species with incompatible social structures. Economic systems clash when trade requirements cannot be met. Dr. Webb was studying the displays with growing amazement. Sarah, look at these resource allocation problems. They're trying to feed species that require completely different nutrients, provide energy to civilizations with totally different technological bases, and mediate disputes between cultures that have fundamentally incompatible worldviews. Sarah watched the data streams, her negotiation experience helping her identify patterns. Overlord, these aren't conquest problems. These are management problems. You're not expanding because you want to conquer worlds. You're expanding because you're hoping new species will bring solutions to existing challenges. The chamber fell silent. Representative Vector Prime, the geometric pattern being, spoke with a voice like mathematics given sound. Integration Protocol 774 states that expansion provides access to new resources and capabilities. New species contribute unique solutions to persistent problems. But it's not working, is it? Sarah asked gently. Each new species you integrate brings their own resource requirements, their own cultural conflicts, their own technological incompatibilities. You're not solving problems, you're accumulating them. Overlord Thexakar's spines flattened completely. You speak of matters that have challenged the Confederation's greatest minds for centuries, human. If solutions existed, they would have been implemented. May I ask a personal question, Overlord? Sarah said, stepping closer to his environmental zone. How long have you been trying to solve these problems the same way? I have served as primary negotiator for 67 years, Thexkar replied. My predecessors employed the same methods for over 3 centuries before me. Sarah nodded. In human problem solving, we've learned that sometimes the solution isn't doing the same thing better. Sometimes it's doing something completely different. Sub-Commander. Vril moved closer to the human group. Explain this concept of something completely different, human Sarah. Dr. Webb looked at Sarah with growing excitement. He'd clearly reached the same conclusion she had. Commander, I think I see what you're getting at. They're trying to solve a diversity problem with uniformity. Exactly, Sarah said, addressing the entire chamber. Representatives of the Confederation, you have something that most civilizations spend centuries trying to achieve. You have incredible diversity. Different species, different perspectives, different capabilities, different solutions to different problems. But instead of leveraging that diversity, you're trying to manage it. Representative Bloom Tender's petals, shifted to colors Sarah was learning, indicated interest. Elaborate on this concept of leveraging diversity. Human. On Earth, humans come from hundreds of different cultures with different languages, customs, and ways of thinking, Sarah began. For most of our history, we tried to solve conflicts by making everyone the same. It never worked. Cultural suppression always led to resistance and rebellion. Lieutenant Okafor stepped forward. But in the last century, we learned something different. Our greatest achievements came when we brought different cultural perspectives together to solve problems. Different ways of thinking produced solutions none of us could have reached alone. Impossible, declared a new voice. A massive alien that looked like an armored bear with 6 arms descended from an upper platform. I am Admiral Cretan, Confederation Fleet Commander. Unity requires uniformity. Different perspectives lead to conflict and inefficiency. Sarah turned to face the Admiral. Admiral Cretan, with respect, you have 237 different species in your Confederation. You've already got all the different perspectives. The question is whether you use them as a strength or treat them as a problem to be managed. You propose that diversity is an advantage? Vector Prime asked, their geometric patterns shifting into new configurations. This contradicts fundamental unity principles. Let me give you an example, Sarah said, walking to the center of the chamber. Sub-Commander Vril mentioned that this ship uses 70% of its energy just for life support. That's because you're trying to accommodate every species' requirements simultaneously. But what if you didn't have to? Dr. Webb caught on immediately. What if, instead of one ship trying to accommodate everyone, you had specialized ships for different environmental requirements with crew members chosen for optimal function in each environment? Preposterous, Admiral Cretan declared. The Confederation must present unified leadership. Segregation leads to fragmentation. Not segregation, Sarah replied. Specialization. Look at your resource allocation problems. You're trying to grow food that every species can eat, instead of having different worlds specialize in different crops and trading with each other. Representative Zixhal chimed with what sounded like excitement. Human Sarah suggests economic specialization rather than standardization. Mathematical models indicate significant efficiency improvements would be possible, but cultural conflicts would remain, Bloom Tender pointed out, their petals shifting to more cautious colors. Would they? Lieutenant Okafor asked. In human experience, most cultural conflicts arise when different groups are forced to compete for the same resources or conform to the same standards. But when different cultures are valued for their unique contributions, cooperation becomes more beneficial than conflict. Sarah looked around the chamber, reading body language and energy patterns. Representatives, can I ask you something? When was the last time your species felt that their unique perspectives were valued by the Confederation? Not just tolerated or managed, but actively sought out and celebrated? The silence was profound. Sarah could see representatives of different species looking at each other with expressions she was learning to read, as recognition and longing. Finally, Sub-Commander Vril spoke. Human Sarah, you propose something that has never been attempted. Confederation doctrine requires unity through integration. You suggest unity through, what is the term? Cooperation, Sarah replied. Unity through cooperation means everyone contributes what they do best, rather than everyone trying to do everything the same way. Admiral Cretan descended to the main floor, his massive form radiating skepticism. Human, you speak of theoretical concepts. The Confederation faces real problems requiring immediate solutions. Resource shortages threaten 17 worlds. Cultural revolts are growing on 43 others. Economic systems are failing on entire sectors. Those sound like exactly the kinds of problems that diverse perspectives could solve, Dr. Webb said, pulling up his own data displays. Admiral, look at your resource shortage reports. Every single shortage involves trying to produce universal solutions. But I can see at least 6 species in this room that could provide alternative resources if they were asked to contribute their specialties, instead of conforming to standard production quotas. Sarah walked closer to Admiral Cretan's environmental zone. Admiral, what if I told you that humans might be able to help solve some of these immediate problems? Not through integration, but through cooperation? Explain, the Admiral demanded. Earth has developed sophisticated conflict resolution protocols, resource optimization systems, and cultural mediation techniques, Sarah replied. We've spent centuries learning how to make diversity work as a strength. We could share those techniques with the Confederation. In exchange for what? Overlord Thexkar asked suspiciously. Sarah smiled. In exchange for the opportunity to be part of something remarkable. Overlord, you have the most diverse civilization in galactic history. With the right approach, the Confederation could become the most successful civilization in galactic history. 2. Humans would be honored to contribute to that achievement. Representative vector primes patterns shifted into complex mathematical configurations. Statistical analysis indicates human proposals have potential for significant optimization, improvements. However, implementation would require fundamental restructuring of Confederation protocols. Change is scary, Sarah acknowledged. But Overlord, Admiral, representatives, your current approach isn't working. Your expansion is driven by desperation, not strength. Your member species are becoming increasingly restless. How long can you continue on the current path before the system collapses entirely? The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Sarah could see the weight of it settling on the assembled representatives. Sub-Commander Vril stepped forward. Human Sarah, if cooperation were attempted, what would be the first step? Sarah looked around the chamber at dozens of different species, each with their own needs, their own strengths, their own perspectives. The first step would be asking a different question. Instead of, how do we make everyone the same? We'd ask, how do we help everyone be their best? Admiral Cretan's armored plates shifted. And you believe humans possess knowledge that could facilitate this approach? We believe we could contribute to it, Sarah replied. But Admiral, the real knowledge is already here in this room. You have representatives from hundreds of different worlds, different cultures, different ways of thinking. The solution isn't bringing in another species to rule over everyone else. The solution is learning how to let everyone rule themselves while contributing to common goals. Overlord Thexkar rose from his platform, his presence commanding attention from every being in the chamber. Human Sarah Chen, you propose something unprecedented in galactic history. The abandonment of integration protocols in favor of cooperation protocols. I propose trying something that might actually work, Sarah replied gently. Overlord, you've been trying the same approach for 400 years. It's created an incredible achievement, bringing together hundreds of different species. But it's also created problems that keep getting worse. Maybe it's time to try building on your achievements instead of just managing your problems. The chamber erupted in discussion as representatives of different species began talking among themselves. Sarah noticed that for the first time, species were talking directly to each other instead of channeling everything through the hierarchical command structure. After several minutes, Overlord Thexkar called for order. Human Sarah Chen, the Confederation, Council will consider your proposals but understand the magnitude of what you suggest. Changing protocols that have governed galactic civilization for centuries cannot be undertaken lightly. Of course not, Sarah agreed. But Overlord, can it be undertaken at all? Are you willing to consider that there might be better ways to achieve unity? Sub-Commander Vril looked directly at Sarah. Human, if cooperation protocols were implemented, what would prevent the Confederation from fragmenting into competing factions? The same thing that prevents human nations from constant warfare, Lieutenant Okafor replied. Mutual benefit. When cooperation produces better results than competition, people choose cooperation. And when it doesn't? Admiral Cretan challenged. Sarah smiled. Then you have systems for resolving disputes without warfare. Mediation, arbitration, compromise, creative problem-solving. Humans have gotten pretty good at these techniques, but I suspect some of your species have developed even better ones. Dr. Webb was studying his readings of the various species present. Commander, I'm detecting what appear to be natural mediation behaviors in at least 12 different species in this room. The Confederation has been treating their diversity as a management problem when it could be their greatest asset. Representative Bloomtender's petals shifted to bright, optimistic colors. Humans propose that Confederation strength lies not in uniformity but in coordinated diversity? Exactly, Sarah said. Imagine what you could accomplish if every species contributed their best capabilities, instead of conforming to average standards. The chamber fell silent again as the implications sank in. Finally, Overlord Thexkar spoke. Human Sarah Chen, the Confederation Council will deliberate on your proposals. If cooperation protocols are deemed viable, would Earth be willing to participate in their development and implementation? Sarah looked at her companions, seeing excitement and determination in their faces. Overlord, Earth would be honored to help, but more than that, we'd be excited. This could be the beginning of something truly extraordinary. Or the end of everything the Confederation has built, Admiral Cretan warned. Admiral, Sarah replied. Gently, from what I've seen, what the Confederation has built is unsustainable. The question isn't whether change will come. The question is whether you'll guide that change or be overwhelmed by it. As the massive chamber filled with discussion and debate in dozens of different languages, Sarah realized that the universe was about to change in ways no one could predict. For the first time in galactic history, conquest was being replaced by cooperation, uniformity by coordinated diversity, management by leadership. It was going to be the greatest negotiation in history, and it was just beginning.